Hello, you're on the Ruslan Belov channel. Yesterday, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan announced that an agreement had been reached on a meeting between Putin and Zelensky, and that this meeting will take place soon. Although personally, I have serious doubts that it will actually happen. Meanwhile, fighting continues on the Ukrainian front, and we continue analyzing the situation at the front lines. Before we begin, I sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription helps the channel grow. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. So friends, over the past 24 hours, the Russian army continued to advance at a good pace, gaining control over more than 20 square kilometers, and, most importantly, over several settlements. And the advances happened in areas where the AFU had serious defenses and fortified zones. But as often happens, it all collapsed. Let's start with one of the key developments, the breakthrough of Russian forces, namely the 1st Tank Army, toward Kupyansk. But before that, let me say a few words about Pokrovsk. I see a lot of questions about whether Russian troops are in the city or not, how far they've advanced, what parts of the city they reached, etc. Footage showing Russian sabotage reconnaissance groups already in Pokrovsk appeared yesterday. Once again, Russian assault troops are already clearing Pokrovsk. That's a fact. You can't argue with video evidence. Now let's go to Kharkiv region. Take a look at the territories that came under Russian control. Just a day ago, they took 16 square kilometers, now over 10 more, so more than 25 square kilometers were taken here in just a couple of days. Did the AFU's defense collapse? Absolutely. Earlier, advances weren't even daily, maybe a kilometer or so here and there. But now, 25 in 2 days. So what happened in the past 24 hours? First, Russian forces regained previously lost positions in Kontrashivka, driving out the AFU completely. The entire village is now under Russian control. Unable to hold their ground, Ukrainian troops were forced to retreat as far as the railway line where their new defensive line is located. That's a 4-kilometer retreat for them. Second, east of Radkivka, which was taken yesterday, Russian forces expanded their control by capturing Holubivka and, notably, entering the right bank part of Kupyansk. I mentioned this yesterday when local fighters said Russian forces were already present on the outskirts of the city. Then we received footage confirming this, and even American mapping services marked the advancement. They showed only a small incursion, but in reality it's already not a grey zone. This street in Kupyansk is controlled by Russian forces. Thus, the battle for Kupyansk has officially begun. What's especially important is securing the right bank part of the city. Once you hold that, the lower elevated left bank part becomes untenable. Just look at the topography. You capture the higher ground and the lower ground falls automatically. By the way, remember in the fall of 2024, Russian forces entered the left bank part of Kupyansk. They even reached the city center, the left bank center that is. But they couldn't hold it because the right bank was under Ukrainian control, and the Russians were shelled from above with everything the AFU had. It was like a shooting range, impossible to control anything. But this also works in reverse. If Russian troops now manage to capture the right bank, then all of Kupyansk will likely fall quickly. The left bank is nearly impossible to defend without the right bank. We've also finally received good news from the Siversky direction, with video confirmation. Russian forces reportedly took control of a large section of the Cerebriansky Forest and secured territory at a former camp. Now to other advances, and there were some very significant ones. The main events unfolded in the Pokrovsk-Mirnohrad area and the southern Donetsk direction, where several settlements came under Russian control. We have video confirmations from all of them. Notably, this is where the AFU made their first advance in 3 days. It's small, of course, compared to Russian progress, but I always report on both sides to stay objective. So, in the last 24 hours, Ukrainian forces slightly pushed back Russian troops south of Mirnohrad, near Hrodivka, just here. They advanced 500 meters with a very narrow width. In essence, they recaptured one field. That's the only part of the huge front where they moved forward, again for the first time in 3 days. The total area gained 0.3 square kilometers. Now let's look at Russian advances. First, Russian forces advanced 1.8 kilometers between the villages of Novotoretskoye and Popov Yar, gaining 4 square kilometers there. But the biggest success was the capture of Novoekonomichne. This is not just a village, it's an urban-type settlement with substantial infrastructure. It was also the last major defensive node protecting Mirnohrad from the east. I say was, because it's now under full Russian control. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced the capture of the settlement 2 days ago, and yesterday we received video confirmations from various parts of Novoekonomichne showing Russian flags, confirming full control. What does this mean? It means the road to Mirnohrad from the east is now open. From here, along the Shosynaya road, it's only about 2 kilometers to the city. Given Novoekonomichne's size, it will clearly be used as a base for Russian troops and resources ahead of future attacks on the city itself. And considering how much trouble the AFU is having in nearby Pokrovsk, I think their situation in Mirnohrad will be even worse. We'll see soon enough. Also, from Novotoretskoye, Russian forces significantly approached the settlement of Zapovidne, and from Fedorivka, they entered the village of Zatishok. As of now, Mirnohrad is surrounded on 3 sides, and I see no signs the AFU can reverse the situation. These minor 500-meter counterattacks won't solve anything, even if we only take this part of the front. In the past 24 hours, the AFU gained 0.3 square kilometers, while the Russian army gained 13 square kilometers. That's the whole difference right there. These Ukrainian attacks won't change the overall picture. Mirnohrad, like Pokrovsk, is clearly doomed. The only question is when, September, October, or later. What else about the advances? South of Pokrovsk, Russian forces took half of the village of Novukrainka, and we can soon expect an assault on Pokrovsk from this direction as well. Pokrovsk's defense is collapsing at an astonishing speed. The AFU did report transferring massive reinforcements yesterday, but I doubt it will help. Their best chances to fortify the city were already lost. Now defending it will be extremely costly for Ukraine. Given their severe infantry shortages, I don't believe Ukraine can hold these cities even for another month. Now to the southern Donetsk direction, where we're also seeing very good news. The AFU defenses there have seriously crumbled. The first settlement fully captured by Russian troops was Zeleny High. Russia's Ministry of Defense has already confirmed this, and the Vostok Group also released footage showing fighting and flags across the settlement. Although the maps haven't marked it red yet, they will. We have no doubt it's fully under Russian control. A bit further south, the village of Malivka also came under Russian control, and we have video confirmation from there too. This village, as you can see, is already in Dnipropetrovsk region, meaning Russian forces have entered the Dnipropetrovsk region at least in 2 separate places. There's also good news from Zaporizhzhia region, specifically from the area around Kupyansk. So far, we don't have video confirmation, only soldier reports. So I'll briefly describe the situation, and once we have footage, we'll discuss the prospects in more detail. According to reports, Russian troops managed to break out of Kupyansk and reach Stepnohirsk, a settlement north of Kupyansk. What's more, they didn't just reach it, they captured a school building there, in the area of apartment blocks. Again, we don't yet have objective control footage, so the map hasn't updated. We'll wait. If what the troops are saying is accurate, footage should appear soon. Even the popular Ukrainian resource Deep State reports this movement. To sum up, over the past 24 hours, 23.2 square kilometers came under Russian control, while the AFU took only 0.3 square kilometers. That's all I have for now on the frontline situation. Now, a few important political updates. The first alarm bell has rung for Zelensky. He is no longer seen as a sacred symbol, and calls for his resignation during protests are growing louder. The failed attempt to dismantle NABU, National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, could become a death sentence for both Zelensky and Yermak, as it clearly exposed the weakness of the presidential office chief. In reality, Zelensky's entire inner circle consists of corrupt officials. This includes the case of Chernyshev, and preparations are underway to bring charges against Mindyk. There are billions in corruption tied to arms procurement and the construction of defense infrastructure. And all of this is happening during wartime, while the president's office is trying to bury the cases. Zelensky's political strategists failed the media campaign aimed at reorganizing NABU and SAP, specialized anti-corruption prosecutor's office, which led to Zelensky pulling back and hurriedly submitting a new draft law, marking Yermak's first major defeat as the moderator of all domestic processes. Now, Bankova, Zelensky's office, will try to buy time to extract and bury cases involving Zelensky's inner circle. At the same time, Zelensky has requested $65 billion from the West for the war. This sum, Zelensky said, is needed to cover budget deficits for the army, drones, and defense. He plans to ask European leaders to fund not just arms, but also soldiers' salaries. War expenses now make up about half of Ukraine's national budget, and that exact amount is roughly $65 billion. Effectively, Ukraine's budget deficit is its war expenditure. For years, this hole has been patched up by Western countries, but whenever that financial flow slowed, the front line began to crumble. Now the situation has changed, and no one is giving money in the same volume as before. Trump once again opened the door to imposing massive secondary sanctions against Russia and said he wants negotiations with Moscow on a nuclear weapons treaty. "We are considering this," he said when asked about it. Earlier, he had threatened Russia with 100% secondary tariffs if Moscow didn't agree to a ceasefire by the end of August. At the same time, Trump said the US intends to begin talks with Moscow on a new nuclear arms limitation treaty. When nuclear limits are lifted, that's a big problem. "This is not the kind of treaty you want to allow to expire," he said in the media before flying to London. The current treaty was extended in 2021 and remains in force until February 5, 2026. The Biden administration had earlier stated its readiness to resume talks with Russia on a new START agreement. However, the treaty is currently suspended by Moscow. Regarding the sanctions, Medinsky also responded. When asked whether Russia fears the new sanctions imposed by the European Union and those threatened by the United States, Medinsky pointed to even harsher restrictions the country had faced in its history. "That's not a question for us or for the negotiating team," he said. "But I'll tell you this. After the Civil War and Revolution in 1920, just to give some historical perspective, we didn't just face sanctions. The Soviet Union was under complete diplomatic and economic blockade from all sides. And that didn't stop us from winning World War II," he emphasized, following the third round of talks with Ukraine in Istanbul. Germany barely managed to hand over a single air defense system, and Kiev is asking for money on top of that. At the end of last week, Germany delivered its first Patriot air defense system to Ukraine, according to The Telegraph, citing its sources. On July 13th, Trump and Dutch Prime Minister Rutte jointly announced a $10 billion aid package and spoke of the potential for strict trade tariffs against Russia and any country that buys its fossil fuels. By the end of that week, Patriot Systems and additional interceptors had already arrived in Ukraine, thanks to a deal with Germany, the report says. The US is now trying to convince other European nations to hand over their Patriots immediately, with the expectation that America will replace them in the future. However, for some countries, this is a difficult request, as replacements from the US won't arrive until early next year. The article notes the complications this creates for Washington's European allies. That's all for today, friends. Thank you for watching and staying informed with us. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment with your thoughts. It really helps the channel grow. Take care, and we'll see you in the next update. Stay safe.